The sport of off-road racing is full of incredible stories, wild characters, legends, and even villains. We cover it all on offroadracer.com, but there's only so much we can put down in an article. Sometimes we have to dig a little deeper, and that means sitting down with some of our industry's most influential characters and hitting record. Welcome to the Off-Road Racer Podcast, a Mad Media production, made exclusively for offroadracer.com. Each month, we'll go beyond the dirt into the homes, shops, and lives of the most interesting and game-changing icons of our sport. You'll hear about their history, success, failure, and everything in between as we pull back the curtain and reveal the stories of their lives. I'm your host, Matt Martelli, and this is the Off-Road Racer Podcast. I'm Matt Martelli here with the Off-Road Racer Podcast, and I've got my brother from another mother, but I got to be careful that I say that around his actual dad, right?
Yeah.
Jim Beaver, and of course, the legendary Dan Beaver. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Wonderful.
Yeah, this is really cool. We're sitting in your shop right now, and I'm just looking around at all the history here, and especially that step-side Ford back there. Tell us a little bit about that truck, because it's got some stories.
That's got a lot of stories, and it's been used for everything. And when I got started in off-road, that is the very first build that I ever did from start to finish. And I built a pre-runner. I had a race car that was a 79 that was a lot like that, but tell you the truth, we should have raced that one and pre-ran the other one. I think we'd had more success.
Right.
But I bet, and its appropriate name is Brutus.
Nice.
And family knows it as Brutus. In the off-road world, the people, they just know who Brutus is. And it was out there forever and ever. And I pre-ran in it. I never raced it. Jimmy got his first racing experience in that truck. And so did Trent, my youngest son. And so it's just been in the family forever.
Yeah,
it was the first car I was ever built in the shop.
I love that era of truck design, and it seems like ever since then they've made them uglier and uglier, right?
I agree.
That just looks like the quintessential American man's truck. You know what I mean? Like, it can do anything.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, going back, how did you get into off-road racing? I mean, I know born and raised here in Parker, or actually, no, you came in after the fact, right?
Yeah. Where do you start and where do you finish with this question? But our family has raced everything, from horses to cars to boats and everything else in between. Motorcycles when I wasn't supposed to, but I did anyway.
Right.
Anyway, my dad was a world champion boat racer. And I was actually, and he raced hydroplanes back in the day, and he won 13 or 14 national championships nationwide. And I was actually training to take over his hydroplanes, and they had a regatta. And my dad had quit driving by then, and one of his drivers got killed. And kind of took a toll on my dad. And he kind of eased away from the boats a little bit, and him and Bill Stropp had a great relationship. Stropp was actually a boat racer before he ever raced a car.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, he was. And he built a 225 cubic inch hydro, and my dad raced in that class, and they were great friends. And anyway, Parker Motor got started in racing through Stropp, and Stropp had a young driver that was phenomenal. Name was Walker Evans. And Walker needed a little help, and Stropp called my dad and says, I need a pickup truck. He says, you supply the pickup truck, and we'll build the truck here. So my dad actually paid and gave Stropp a truck. Stropp built it. Walker ran 18 races in a row in it. My dad got paid back. And if you look in the old race photos, his long bed said Parker Motors on it.
Wow, that's so cool.
So my dad got real interested in off-road, and we bought a truck off a guy that had finished second place in Parker in 1975. And it was a Stropp truck, red, white, and blue. And it sat in our dealership for 6-8 months. The guy he drove it to the race, and he wanted to drive it home, but it wasn't ready to drive home. Transmission was out, the exhaust had fell off, it sat there. Gary Surdyke was the guy's name. He called from Missouri and said, man, fix my truck. I need to drive it home. This was in November, and the race had been in February.
Right.
So my dad fixed it all up. Surdyke came. He got a ride into Parker. took one look at that truck, and he says, I'm not driving that all the way back to Missouri. What do you give me for it? He said, $2,500. He said, I'll take $2,500 and buy a new truck. He bought a new truck, drove back to Missouri. We had our first race car. So, and that was the old long bed that I ever raced.
Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of how we got started in off-road.
Yeah, he sent me a photo of that truck the other day, and you're skying it pretty good. That thing jumped.
Oh, my gosh. You know, I used to do some things that was unheard of, you know. I think they were all mistakes. You didn't want to do that in those days, but you just did them.
Well, when you only got 3 or 4 inches of wheel travel, everything's airborne.
It looked cool.
Yeah.
It looked cool, man.
Yeah. So, you know, and it just kind of took off after that. You know, the first race I didn't drive, I rode with a guy by the name of Ed Venable, and Ed had won overall the Parker race in 1975 in a little car, Class 1 buggy named Bonnie's Buttbuster, and he won Parker. And the next, my dad put him in the Class 8 truck, and I rode my first race.
Right.
And that guy was a wild man. I was ready to get out of that truck.
Yeah.
I mean, Ed was a complete wild man, but Ed taught me the most valuable lesson that I ever had, and that is pre-running is important. He was a pre-run nut. I started going 1st December. The race wasn't until February. I was going to college, and he made me come home every weekend. We ran the California side once and the Arizona side twice for 10 weeks prior to that race.
Oh, God.
And he used to tell me, he says, you want that course to be like an old movie show that you've seen 100 times and nothing ever changes.
Right.
And so that's where I got my bad habit of pre-running a lot.
Well,
And
that's paid dividends, right?
Oh, absolutely it did. You know, and there's more to the story, but that's kind of how we got started.
That's really cool. And then obviously Venable went on to do some amazing things in off-road.
No, he was related to that Venable, but not the same Venable.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, he was related, but not the same Venable.
Right.
And Ed was from Blythe, California.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And well, he always told me he was related distantly, but not the same Venable.
Well, I think one of the things here is Dad says that's kind of how we get started. But the next thing is like, and he didn't say this, but I think it's kind of cool is Bill Stropp only ever co-drove with a handful of people in his career. You know, he's a legendary guy, and Dad was one of the guys he co-drove with. And then probably another cool thing was Dad did mention, but him and Mickey Thompson were close friends, and Mickey Thompson and Dad were pre-run partners. So Dad learned a lot from Mickey Thompson.
Oh, boy. Mick would come down and say, let's go pre-running, and Dad said, just go. It didn't matter what day of the week it was or whatever, and if it was December or January, and Mickey and me put so many miles on cars out there, and he taught me so much about driving and all the little things, you know, and he was just, I remember one day we're going down the wash, and I think we're in Brutus, and just going as we go, and he turns to me and looks at me and says, are you the greatest racer there's ever been in the world? And I kind of looked at him and said, no. And he says, yes, you are, and you better remember that. You are. He says, unless you have that mentality, you'll never do well. That was Mick.
That's rad. I mean, it's funny because, like, when we, going over to our side, when we, got a hold of the Parker race and started putting together the announcement, I had remember seeing this photo, and it was you. It was Mickey. It was
that was my grandpa.
Sorry, that was your grandpa. Yeah,
Right.
My grandpa, Mickey, Madison,
Ed Madison, and the guy from the BLM office.
Yeah, was Sal in that photo? I
think
don't
Sal-
remember.
Well, I don't know.
There was one that Sal was in too, but maybe it wasn't that same one. But it was like this iconic photo of like
They were at the airport.
Yeah, like people don't understand, not just the race vehicles, but the race courses. It's just we imagine it and how it can be, and then we manifest it. And it was cool to see, back in the day, those guys, they didn't have GPS and computers and all the stuff that we have now. Frankly, we get to cheat a lot. You know, we can kind of get right to it and then go out on the course and verify everything. But it was just cool to see that image, and we used that in our press release about Parker coming back.
I actually believe my dad had taken him in his Bonanza and flew the California side of the course and the Arizona side of the course that day so they could see from the air, where the course was going and things.
The Off-Road Racer podcast is sponsored by Monster Energy. Fueling athletes, musicians, and fans, Monster Energy produces the best energy drinks, brewed coffee, hydrating sports drinks, juices, and teas. And now they just came out with Monster Tour Water, which I love. It was previously exclusive to all the Monster musicians and athletes, but now it's available for everyone. This deep well water is pure drinking water, sourced locally in the USA and packed into an infinitely recyclable can. Check for Monster Energy drinks at your local store.
You know, that we got the Parker race, right? Because it's one of these things where it's kind of like, I put it out of my mind because I was like, well, it's out of our control, you know, and oftentimes I get caught up in this, like, you know what they should do? And I got to be careful because I can't control other people, right? Correct. But I have such a reverence for the history and culture of the sport and all the people involved in it that came before me that created this. I think that's really important, right? I think it's really important that we talk about all these things. And for me as a kid coming to Parker the first time, you know, I just remember the first time I'd ever been to Colorado River, and you have no reference point for a river in America until you've seen the Colorado River, right? You roll up on the Colorado River, and first off, it is the most amazing blue color that you've ever seen, right?
Yep.
It's like fluorescent blue, right? And then, you know, you're in this desert environment, and there's all the rocks, and it's just beautiful, right? And then back then we raced on the California side and on the Arizona side, and it was just, you know, I remember being a kid and just going, holy shit, I can't believe this exists. This is amazing. Oh, and by the way, when you're done off-roading, you go swim in the river. I'm like, that's the coolest thing on the planet, right? It was amazing, man. And the crowds were massive. The crowds were massive. You know, I don't think, you know, I hope we find some video footage of that, you know, that 20-year or 10-year era where it was as big as it was.
I actually think that, you know, they used to talk about it in Parker. And I actually think there was 80 to 100,000 people here to see that race, without a doubt.
Yeah, I would not doubt it.
In those days, they didn't control the spectators as well as you guys do and have to do today.
Right.
And when you took off on the Arizona side, there were spectators lining that course all the way around.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah. It was. And, it you know, on the California side, you had Thunder Alley. And it was also, what I remember about it was, Jimmy, the place that everybody would debut their trucks, their new vehicles.
Parker was, you know, the equivalent of the Daytona 500. You know, Daytona, you know, NASCAR world, that's a big one. That's the first race of the year. New drivers are in their new suits with their new teams and the new liveries and everything. And Parker was that place for off-road. It was the beginning of the year, so everybody tests in the fall their new cars, and, you know, and they didn't want to debut them with thousands, too long a race, so they'd hold them. And then Parker was the place where, you know, the new paint schemes, the new liveries, the new trucks, everything got unveiled at Parker, you know. So it was a big deal. I mean, Parker still is a big deal. You know, obviously, I think it's going to be a whole lot bigger deal this next year. But
you can bet on that.
You know, Parker was that place. I mean, it was January rolled around, and it was like the entire off-road world turned their eyes on Parker. What's going to happen? You know,
who's bringing what to race?
Yeah,
you know, and you knew somebody was building a new car. But you didn't know what it looked like. There was no internet. There was nothing. And unless they let you into their shop, you didn't get to see it.
Yeah.
And so the first glimpse you got was here at Parker.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, too, like, you know, having tech and contingency downtown. You know, this is a Western American town that's just, you know, it's a small town, but it's super cool, man. It's like, you know, just really Americana, you know, and it's I really enjoy that part of it. And the fact that it's, you know, it's joining 2 states, et cetera, it's just really cool. And now, again, I was really stoked that we ended up with it so that we could unlock that history and, you know, and pay homage to that. You know, Manny Iscaria, like absolutely. a lot of the legends who came from this area and raced in this area. You know, and now we get to introduce, you know, new generations of kids, especially the UTV guys, you know, the youth racers and so on. Now they're going to know about Parker too.
Sure they are.
Yeah.
That's you know, and I've said this to people before, and they kind of look at me weird, and I go, you know, Parker is this weird place where, you know, and I've said, I was like, you want to talk about more off-road race winners, per capita in 1 square mile, there's no other place on the planet that, aside from Crandon on the short course side, that's produced more winners. I mean, you look at this 1 square mile and how many people have won off-road races that, had a residence here. There's no place else on the planet. Yeah, you can say Los Angeles, but Los Angeles is a lot bigger than 1 square mile.
Yeah,
it's like
massive,
1 square mile, there's no other place on the planet that's produced more off-road winners than Parker, Arizona.
I think you can safely say there's no off-roaders in one random square mile.
That's probably the truth. Like I said, aside from maybe Crandon, where you've got, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's just this unique place. But people here, as a kid, like, you eat, sleep, breathe this. I remember growing up, I mean, these were the superheroes as kids, you know what I mean? Robbie Gordon, that guy was just, he was on a pedestal in the fact he had a residence here, and you'd see him come in once in a while. But it's like, Parker, when you grow up in Parker, off-road's just a part of your DNA. And kids grow up and they immediately want a dirt bike. They want a UTV now. Everybody wants to build something to go race. I mean, when I was a kid, they were building Rangers in their garage trying to get them to be a sportsman truck and score back in the day and things like that. It's just, it's just a weird place where off-road is literally in the DNA makeup of every single person that grows up here.
I don't, it's funny because we say that it's weird, but when you really, because I've been thinking about this a lot, when you really distill it down, it's not weird. It's, it's this meeting point between California and Arizona.
Absolutely.
That's defined by the river, right? Mm-hmm. And so, in the middle of summer, people are here on the river. In the middle of winter, people are here off-roading, right? Mm-hmm. So it's this... it's this really cool transition point between, the dream of California and the dream of Arizona, which are similar but different, right? And also, we saw this during COVID. It's like everybody from California came over here because they're like, yo, we are not free in California. We need to go to another state. Yeah. To be free again. So
Parker and Lake Havasu have just absolutely blown up, especially since COVID. But it's just, it's amazing the amount of businesses that are moving here. We've got a guy that uprooted his entire UTV shop to move to Parker, you know, and it's, from Southern California. But just between Parker and Havasu, I have more friends that are living in Parker and Havasu now that I did 3 or 4 years ago, hands down.
Oh, yeah. And one of the things I want to mention here that Jimmy just touched on in Parker and off-road racers, people don't realize that once off-road racers found Parker, they all moved here. You realize that Walker had a home here, Parnelli had a home here, Jim Zupanovich had a home here. These are all racers.
The Gordons.
The Herps.
Yep.
They all
Robbie
bought
and Bob
home.
Gordon.
Robbie and Bob. And Bad Knocks upriver, it's not there anymore. But you could go to Bill Herrick's shop at Bad Knocks, and that was like the meeting place on Saturday afternoon. Everybody that was in town, and the Herps had their house right next to Bad Knocks. They all met there. You could go there on any Saturday, and Walker would be there. Parnelli would be there.
Well, even Paul Tracy moved to Parker for a long time.
Moved to Parker. It just attracted people.
Yeah, no, before he passed, the Weatherman was right here.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Bob Steinberger.
Bob Steinberger. So, and I know his son has a place up in Havasu now. So, Scott. So, I'm not lying. I'm looking for a place here. You know what I mean? And just, getting the race supercharged it. But, this is an area that, reminds me of Baja, right?
Absolutely.
But with being in America, right? So it's got all the accoutrements of America, but it really, especially this stretch between Havasu and Parker feels like, you're in Baja, which is cool. And I think a lot of people relate to that. And then, and then there's the whole, hey, we like horsepower. So, we like cruising around the river in high horsepower boats. That's fun. So I think it's, it's awesome, and I'm looking forward to it. So, Dan, growing up racing, what was that era that you raced in was just, everything was new. It was seemingly epic. I remember being a kid and just, being surrounded by my heroes and seeing all this stuff unfold, from the different vehicles to the different engines to, people trying 4-wheel drive and so on. What was that like for you racing in that era?
Well, I tell people that I raced in the greatest era of off-road. And what we did, it really got started back in the late 70s, 78, 79, 80. And then a lot of the big names came in and raced Class 8. Class 8 was the class to race, and it is your trophy truck of today.
Yeah.
That's all there was to it. And the people that raced in that class, Walker and Stan Gilbert and Jim Jacobus and John Baker, and I'm missing people here.
Vessels.
Vessels, Shop.
Yep.
Even
and
Ivan
Dave
raced it
Weston,
for a while.
Ivan.
Yeah.
That's where you raced, and I raced right in the middle of all that, and that was the greatest time of my life. And it was just, and we did that all the way up until somebody dreamed of the trophy truck, and a few of the guys left. Some of them stayed, and they went on to trophy truck. I stayed. I knew at the time that I didn't have the funding or the backing to build a trophy truck, so I stayed in Class 8. And we still had great races for many years.
Yes.
For many years until Class 8 just kind of, Geyser got real involved down in Phoenix and built some really trick Class 8s right before he started the trophy trucks. And he kind of kept it going for a while. And it was just a great time to race, and I wouldn't change a thing. I raced against the best, and that's all I ever wanted to do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was pretty cool. I mean, I know I've sat and had beers and listened to stories, but is there races or moments that you're like, man, that was just something else?
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 of them that stick out in my mind. One of the biggest thorn in my side was in my co-driver, and I got to mention this. Kid grew up down the street down here. In 1986, he called me up. He lived in Yuma, and we were lifelong buddies. Played baseball together. We did everything, me and Randy Hafe, and he ended up being my co-driver. And I'll tell you, I had all my brother-in-laws co-drive with me in things, and they were just along for the fun. They took a bag of sandwiches, and they weren't really serious. And some days we did pretty good, depending on how hard I worked pre-running. But they were just along for the ride, and I love them to death. But then I get this call one day, and I'm looking for help. And he says, he wrote for the Associated Press, I believe it was, and he says, hey, I can get some stories out on you on the AP wires. He says, this is the deal. He said, let me ride a race with you. He was a stock car racer down in Yuma. And I
Interesting.
said, yeah. I said, that sounds good. I says, if you're going to ride, you got to help me prep the car. He says, I'll be there every Sunday. This is about in October.
Right.
And I wasn't going to the 1,000 that year, so we towed the car right here to the ground and built the whole car all the way back up. And he got to know every nut and bolt. And we started pre-running. And I found out that Randy had a photographic memory. It's the best thing that ever happened in my career.
Pre-GPS, too.
Pre-GPS, and he had a photographic memory. We'd go to Baja and run that course, all 500 miles. He knew every rock, every turn. He just had it. And I started getting a lot better.
Yeah.
A lot better. And that year, I told him, this is a funny deal. I said, well, I don't know how long the ride's going to last because I only finished one race last year. I had nothing but mechanical problems. And I said, so he said, well, we'll give it a shot. We almost won this race. I think I lost, got second or something and lost to Walker by a short little bit. And then we went and finished the race. And I asked him, I said, would you do this again? He said, oh, yeah. We had a great year in 86 and finished every race. We didn't win one, but we got a couple seconds, a third, a fourth at the fireworks. And it was just, in going to the Baja 1000, I had 3. I was in third place in points and had a chance to win a point championship. And I think Ford called me. I might have my years concerned, but I didn't go to the 1,000. I couldn't afford to go.
Right.
Repeat story in 1996, third in points, and I didn't go. For the first time ever, I drew an elk tag after 20 years of trying to get an elk tag, and I told them, they wanted me to go because I had a chance to win. I had a new truck by then. It was more modern, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, about $10,000 of work, and I'll go. Otherwise, I'm going elk hunting.
Right.
I went elk hunting. They wouldn't give me any help.
That's crazy. That's
But
great.
Randy, going back to Randy, he really helped my career. I mean, because of his memory, and this is all before GPS. Do you realize I don't think I ever raced with a GPS, did I?
He was pissed off when I wanted to put one in the truck.
That's crazy.
After I started racing, I learned to race. Even GPSs were out, and Dad refused to allow me to race with a GPS. He goes, "You got to learn to race the hard way." And he goes, "That way." He goes, "Don't make that a crutch. Make it a tool." And so I went and raced down in Baja. First couple times I raced down in Baja. Even I was even running a trophy truck at the time before we built the new trophy truck, and I I wasn't running with GPS. Like I won all my first races and stuff, never had a GPS. I had to do it the hard way. Pre-run, do your notes, read the signs, read the terrain, and I was racing against people with GPS and winning races without it because he wouldn't allow one in the truck.
It's funny. My brother and I were talking about this, and with my cousin, and I'm like, it would be really cool to have one race that we do all year, and there's no GPS, right? It just would really make it a different challenge. This week, I was up at my friend's, Emily Miller. She does the all women's rally, and they have no GPS. They're like, here's the coordinates and a map and a compass. You got to hit all these points. I mean, it's a rally. It's different, but it's still, like you just look at this pile of stuff they just gave you, and you're like, what do you do with this, right? But you also, you're speaking to the importance of something that I think is very overlooked today, which is how important your co-driver is. Mm-hmm. And I could tell from racing, like, I've done a lot of races with friends where it was like no stress, but I've done some races where, we're like on it, and having a good co-driver is a massive, massive difference.
Absolutely. Just do me a favor, if you're going to do this thing and not have a race without GPS, don't do it in Barstow. There's too many trails out there, and I've been lost in Barstow.
No, there's only certain places you can do it. But yeah, it'd be like, okay, shut off all the technology.
Yeah.
Right.
You're going to have so many people complain about it, and I think it'd be awesome. Because
it'd be almost worth it for that. You know what I mean?
Oh gosh, the complaints. Oh, you're going to kill us, Matt.
It'd be probably the most talked about social media race on the planet.
The funny thing is, it would actually, I think it would bring speeds down a hair, which I don't think would be a horrible thing, but I think it'd keep people in check.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, too, because as we operate forward, I forget that everybody doesn't have the same knowledge base that we do and growing up in this. And, when we did UTV World Championship and we opened up pre-running, we realized, we've got a whole generation of people who just don't know how to pre-run. They just haven't been taught. So they went around, they basically followed the main race line, and then all the guys who raced in Baja went and found the alternate lines, and then you look at the top 5 in every class, and it's the guys who race in Baja, right? So, and it's an ongoing discussion of, do you pre-run, do you not pre-run? Does it give advantage to the guys who are wealthier because they could spend more time doing it, so on and so forth? But,
Yeah, there's pros and cons of all of that, and I've thought about that for years. I remember the guys that would go down there and spend a week pre-running, and I used to go to the 500, and that was, besides Parker, the 500 was my favorite race. I didn't miss it for years and years, and the pre-run aspect of it was just fun.
Yeah.
And everybody was out there together and pre-running, and if you went off the summit and had problems, somebody come give you help, and get you out of there. But that pre-run was so important, and having Randy in the car with me was amazing because he just remembered every little shortcut, left, right, left, and stood on the main line, and we'd make time.
The Off-Road Racer podcast is sponsored by Dirt Co. Dirt Co. is the original off-road lifestyle clothing brand founded in the deserts of Southern California. From the vast Mojave Desert to the dunes of Glamis to the silt beds of Baja and the slick rock of Moab, off-road culture is a universal language built on freedom, adventure, exploration, and challenge. Go to dirtco.com and check out our full line of clothing for off-roaders.
I'm telling you, like, some of the best times I've had, I don't know, in the past few years has been going to races and pre-running, even though I'm not racing, right? And, you get to stop at the Cheese Cave, and you get to stop at the winery and, and slow it down. But also just, these are our friends, this is our family, and just hang out with them, And the other thing I love about our culture is meeting people. Like, Horsepower Ranch is one of my favorite spots, and if there's somebody there that I don't know, I usually walk up to them and go, hey, and talk to them, buy them a beer, whatever, swap some stories. So that part of our culture, I think, is really cool. That's one of the reasons for me. I'm like, we want pre-running on our U.S. races is because of that. It helps that camaraderie. I was at this last 500, and one of the things that bothered me about it is that, the racers aren't staying together anymore. They're all separated in their house or their hotel or, their compound, right? So They come together momentarily for tech and contingency, and even that, mostly it's the teams and not the racers, right? There's some racers that are hanging out, but like, everybody back in the day was in the same hotel, all the same stuff. So that, I think we need to bring back that kind of camaraderie, because I think it benefits everybody.
Oh yeah.
It benefits the racers, it benefits the teams. They get to share stories and communicate, help each other. But back to what you're saying about pre-running, like, yeah, that's the other thing I like is, like, I literally have no fear of anything when we're during a pre-run, because I know at some point somebody's going to stop and help us. I don't know how many times I'm busting Cameron, one of my guys who works with me, busting his balls for a minute because we went to one of the races with no spares, right?
Yeah.
And I looked at him. I said, "Here's how this is going to work. We're going to go out. We're chasing the herps. We're shooting some stuff. We are going to get a flat in the worst place possible." And he's like, "Oh man, I'm sorry." It's like, okay, this is how we learn, right?
Yeah.
So we go out, sure as shit, get a flat, and it's a big old stick hole, and we don't have anything. We don't even have a jack. You know what I mean? It's like rookies in the desert. And my buddy Mark comes along and laughs at me first, points at me, takes photos, right?
Yeah.
And then helps fix our tire, and we limped it out of there. But like, I literally, I had no panic in me. I'm like, well, we're just going to wait for one of our friends to cruise by and save our ass, because we would do the same.
Yeah. I think I had more fun pre-running than I did racing, at times.
Yeah.
It was just, I don't know how many years I spent Memorial Weekend in Baja for 3 days pre-running, because it's just what I did over Memorial Weekend, and the race was the next week.
Sure.
And, and then when we quit going to Baja, I just kind of missed it. And every Memorial Weekend, I think about being in Baja, and wouldn't it be fun to be pre-running again?
We should go do it.
Yeah.
We should go do it. There's going to be the pre-run for the 1,000 coming up, which will be interesting because it's going backwards this year for the first time. So
that's going to be wild.
Yeah,
it's going to be wild. Well, what was it like for you, Jimmy? Like, growing up in this, like, it must have been pretty damn rad.
He grew up in this shop.
Yeah, in this shop when I was born. See, my brother and sister don't remember the other shop. When you look at Dad, the other side of Dad's house here, there's a literally 2-car garage, that you're supposed to park your car in, your daily driver.
Right.
Well, that was the original race shop, and then this got built when I was a few years old. So I remember that. I mean, as a kid, just using the roll cages and monkey bars and things like that inside the truck when Dad was building trucks. But when this thing got built in, it was just, it's a game changer. I had, I just remember as a kid, I'd get off school. Dad had spent every evening wrenching on trucks out here and every weekend. So I'd get off of school and, Dad get off at 5 o'clock and he'd have dinner or whatever. And then he'd come out and work, until midnight, 1 in the morning, sometimes getting trucks ready. So as a kid, I spent all my time, in the evenings, just out here playing in the shop and riding bikes around and just doing whatever. And, I think I was, 11, 12 years old when Dad taught me to TIG weld, and I was always making ramps or building something out here. And just like, as a kid, it was just, this is what I did in the evenings, and that was kind of it. And then Dad, started taking me to races. I think first time I went to Baja, I was in 3rd or 4th grade. I actually got chicken pox down there, so it was a pretty miserable first experience. But
he did.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go to races with Dad. I remember going, I used to love going to Prim as a kid because that's when Prim first got opened up, and it was like going to Disneyland, So it was like that was the exciting one to go to as a kid. But I remember Fremont Street and the Mint 400, and just all the cars and things like that. So I was pretty lucky, just Dad kind of toted me around, and I just went with Dad. It was just one of those where jumped in the truck and went. He has the old box van. Can't see it on the, obviously on the stream. Dad's got an old box van out there that's now just storage. But I remember going down to Baja and having to ride 6-7 hours in that thing with no air conditioning or anything like that. It's June and you're sweating your ass off. And I was just like, I thought that was the coolest thing on earth. Oh, here I am in this box truck sweating my ass off going to Mexico. And I'm like, as a kid that's like 8, 9 years old, you just thought, you were on top of the world.
Isn't it funny how now you look back at those memories and you're like, you couldn't pull that off now with kids, right? they're like, "Where's my cell phone? I'm
Oh,
hot,
yeah.
I'm cold, or whatever."
Where's
right?
my Game Boy? Or
Yeah, I
whatever.
remember asking my dad as a kid, like, "Hey, can we ride in the back?" Like that was the coolest thing, was to ride in the back of the truck or the back of the van, right? It was the most dangerous spot, but it was like,
So, true story, Dad had a cargo van. I mean, I guess it was the predecessor to, these Sprinters and these Ford Transits now. He had an old Econoline van, and it was a cargo van, so it had the 2 seats in the front. Well, he got it because he could throw more stuff in the back to go to the races.
right.
Well, Mom would be like, well, where's Jim going to ride? And, Dad's like, he just hangs out in the back, whatever, and Mom finally, she got mad. So he went over to the junkyard and found an old seat, and he bolted it to the floor, and he put some old lap belt in there.
Right.
And he goes, well, we called it the throne, but that was like
The third seat.
Yeah.
the third seat, but
Right behind the engine deal.
but
Right.
he had to do it. Mom's like, I'm not allowing him to go to Baja or go wherever without there being a proper seatbelt in this thing. He can't just sit in the back of the cargo van the whole way
a
down to
lawn
Mexico
chair.
or whatever in a lawn chair. And so finally, Dad went to the junkyard, found a seat, bolted it to the floor, put an old lap belt in there, and then that made Mom happy.
It's so classic. And my parents had this old, it was the biggest van they made, right? It's giant. We called it Babe because it was like Babe the Blue Ox, right?
Yeah.
And the seat all the way in the back, me and my brother figured out when my mom would hit a bump, it'd throw us into the air. So we thought that was like a carnival ride, right? So my mom's yelling at us, sit up front, blah, blah, wear your seatbelt. Nope. We go right to the back, unbuckle the seatbelts, wait for it to hit bump, and our heads would hit the ceiling, and we just like laugh our asses off.
Yeah, I remember that cargo van. So I was like a kid and playing Little League, and Dad was my coach. So Dad would drive around town, and he'd have to pick up all the kids on the team because a lot of them, parents weren't real involved or whatever. So we'd pull up to the Little League field, and it had to look like a clown car. Because you've got this cargo van, and here's like a dozen kids that climb out of the back of this cargo van, one out of another. It had to look like something from the circus, but I remember every kid thought it was the coolest van because we'd all stand up, and Dad would go around corners, and we'd be just being thrown around the back of this cargo van,
That's awesome.
one wall or the other, and everybody's trying to stand up and not fall. That's just like we were ping pong balls around the back. I'm like, that was another area you wouldn't be able to get away with any of this stuff now.
Oh, no. Well, and I think that's the problem with the world, right? Is that kids aren't being raised. Maybe we could save the world here and open up Parker Preschool.
There you
go. Lesson number 1: you will ride without a seatbelt in the back of a truck or a van every day, right? Lesson number 2: we're going to teach you how to swim in the Colorado River.
That was the thing, though. Everything was regular cabs back then.
Yeah.
So literally, we drove around, and I remember as a kid when Arizona didn't have seatbelt laws.
Yeah.
But that was just the thing. Like, it was always the cool thing. You didn't want to be the kid riding in the cab. You wanted to be the fourth kid that got to ride in the bed of the truck.
100%. Mm-hmm. That was way cooler, man.
Yeah.
No, that's rad. Well, in growing up with all this racing around you and your dad racing, was there like a moment you remember where you're like, hey, that's my dad? Like a proud moment or, a moment where you were just like, realizing how cool this was?
I guess it was weird because, I remember I was around, all these, I guess, quote-unquote celebrities my whole life, because they'd come and go. And, even to this day, the shop's kind of the when Parker rolls around, Robbie Gordon knows where the Heideke's at, and we'll get text from Robbie Gordon, hey, I'm using the shop today, and he's got Dakar vehicles in here at one point and stuff like that, it's just, so it's like I was around people like that, but I guess every year around Parker, it was kind of the cool thing because then it was like, here's your dad and, here's the biggest race in the world and, and he's racing in it, and all the other kids at school, there's one or two other kids that maybe had a dad racing or something, but that was always the cool deals right around Parker, and that was back in the day when school would shut down on Friday for contingency. It was literally on the school calendar because when they'd have the race and they didn't have the day off for contingency, none of the kids would show up.
Right.
So finally the school's just like, we're just going to give the kids a day off. But the day before, they would actually all the off-road racers would get together and they'd go to the schools and put the cars on display and stuff like that and sign autographs, and all the kids would come out and get to see all the race cars and stuff like that. So, Parker's always embraced off-road, and that was always cool. Here's Dad signing autographs, and, oh, that's my dad, and, all the other kids are going to the school and things like that. So there was some cool stuff like that happened. I just, it was a different era of off-road, and I think you've had glimpses of that. I'm excited for this year because I think it's going to come back to Parker, and it's fun.
That will literally be my goal, is to get, schools shut down for this, and to get, give back to the kids, and, go back to the schools and show them the vehicles. Because in the world today, I think they need more stuff like that,
Oh, you go back to even the whole STEM conversation and stuff like that. I mean, I'm a guy that graduated college, and I'm going to be the first to tell you, like, half of college was a complete waste.
Sure.
And it's like, I'm using bits and pieces of my college degree, but, it's like I truly think, like, letting kids see a race car, and activating that in his brain, like, oh, I could build this, and I think the auto shop classes, the welding classes, things like that, those are so valuable, and I think they get discredited for, these old, literature classes and things like that. I'm like, kids going to learn so much more in a shop class than they are in literature or something.
I mean, I'm a product of ROP programs, like graphic design for me is what, I fell in love with and walked into at 15. And I'm still friends with my teachers, right? Mm-hmm. Like, actually, one of them I'm really good friends with, and, we're doing some projects together. But had I not walked into that classroom and seen screen printing, I walked in and was like, hey, I want to make shirts for my band. That was my agenda, right? And it opened up a whole world to me. Sure. And, I think, that it's a shame that that's gone. We'd like to see more of that and bring it back. But I think you're right. I think that, getting young people interested in, mechanical skills, engineering, all these things starts with giving them something tangible that they think is cool. And, yeah, I mean, a trophy truck is pretty damn cool.
Yes, it is.
But I think we need to do more of that. So I'm game.
Well, and I think and it's interesting that, like, even your guys' races, 2 of the 3 communities you put them on, Barstow, Parker. Parker's very much, you've got kind of the haves and have-nots, and Barstow I think is very much similar. But I think one of my things is, like, I could move anywhere in the country and probably make more money than I do living in Parker. But I love living here, and I've been very successful, with doing TV and national radio and, racing and whatever, but it's one of those where I like being able to show kids in Parker, you can grow up here in a small town that, maybe isn't as wealthy as other communities. And a lot of kids don't ever think that there's anything bigger than this 1 square mile. And I like to be like, hey, look, no, you can do something and you can live in Parker and still be successful and do whatever you want. I think that's one of the things that kids struggle with, whether it's Parker, Barstow. A lot of kids growing up in small communities is they think that there's nothing bigger than that.
Yeah, they're trapped.
They're trapped in that community. I mean, you guys grew up in a small community in Michigan, and look what you guys are doing. It's one of those where I think there's, I think that's one of the struggles with kids. They don't see the bigger world,
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, and I agree. But, like, when you take it back, a generation or 2 generations, it was all small towns in America, right? Yeah. And there's a lot of them still there, and they're struggling. But I think that's an important idea, is understanding that, like, you don't have to be from New York City to be a star or to be successful in life. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's counterproductive, because you're, this last week I was in LA and I was like, holy shit, how can you get anything done here? You're basically in traffic the whole time, right? Yeah. And then just the dog and pony show and the competition of, the car. I've got this car and I've got this house. I was like, not so important to me. I'm more interested in, what my output is and what I'm able to accomplish and create. I mean, we were up till 3 a.m. last night creating a launch video for your new car, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
No, and that's the thing. Like, I think, and Dad can say this, my grandfather. I'm lucky that I grew up, and I'm actually, people that knew my grandpa, I'm a 50-50 mix of my dad and my grandpa. And it's one of those things where, I think Dad will say the same thing, and it's like, you'll probably be the same way. We're all going to go to the grave and probably not going to have as much money as we could have had, but the stories that I'm going to take to the grave, and the experiences, places I've gone, the people I know, the things I did, like, that's pretty damn awesome. I look back at, last 15, 20 years and what the people I know and the places I've been able to go and the stories I have. And I'm like, that's why, like, just him sitting down here, the stories he's got with Mickey Thompson and Bill Strop and things like that. I'm like, you can't buy those experiences.
No.
It's just.
No.
And I think that's one thing that's awesome about off-road. It's just the experiences you get from the sport.
Well, it's an
the
adventure.
people
That's what people don't understand is, yes, it is a competition, but it is adventure, and we may not being, this isn't the African Dakar, right? Like, I always give that race the highest level of props, because they're, racing on one of the most extreme continents, in the world, right? But man, it is definitely adventure, and I, I love it. It's funny. It changes your perspective. We talked about this the other day of like, I've been stuck for 2 nights and 3 days in the middle of Baja and walked out 17 miles to Rancho Melling. But that steak and that shower were the best ones I ever had in my life, right?
The Off-Road Racer podcast is sponsored by Monster Energy. Fueling athletes, musicians, and fans, Monster Energy produces the best energy drinks, brewed coffee, hydrating sports drinks, juices, and teas. And now they just came out with Monster Tour Water, which I love. It was previously exclusive to all the Monster musicians and athletes, but now it's available for everyone. This deep well water is pure drinking water, sourced locally in the USA and packed into an infinitely recyclable can. Check for Monster Energy drinks at your local store.
Well, and I even laughed, like his era of off-road, and obviously still involved, but I'm like, that's when drivers were cowboys, man. I mean, we got things a little plush. Even these UTVs that we've got now are way plusher than what these guys had to go. I'm like, these guys were true cowboys back then.
Straight up. I remember finishing the Mint 400 one year. It was the old course north of town and just brutal. And that rock garden was everything everybody ever talked about. And the car just disintegrated in 4 laps, but it's still going forward. And on the 4th lap, I think it took me 4 hours to run 100 miles.
Yeah.
And my truck was so beat. I remember finishing the race. I don't know. I didn't finish well. I think I got 4th place in Class 8. But what's funny is, believe it or not, there were so many Class 8s that day. It was a good payday for me.
Right.
It really was back in the day. But I literally could not get out of the car. I'd been stuck in that car. I hadn't got out but once, I think, all day. And they had to help me get out of the car. I was so beat. I mean, I couldn't move my neck. I couldn't do it. It was terrible. These kids don't realize how good they have it.
Oh, no.
No.
No, when I review the old footage and, the photos and stuff, and I'm like, man, like, 4 inches of travel on some of the stuff, right? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And then, too, also, like, everything was new and experimental. So it was like, oh, you got a Mazda? Let's race it. You got a whatever. You got a Toyota?
It's like the old Class 6s. Let's take sedans and race them.
I think we should bring that back.
I actually love Class 6 back. That was my favorite class to watch as a kid.
I mean, when James Garner rolls out with a sedan and he's, he's the cool guy, right? I mean, it was pretty badass.
Yeah.
I'd like for a minute there, I'm like, wow, sedan. I'm like, no. You know what I mean? Like,
let's bring it back. I'm going to go find an old El Camino with a 460, and we're going to have some fun.
I'm in.
Ranchero.
Ranchero. Excuse me. Ranchero with a 460. Ranchero. Well, El Camino's a Chevy.
Like I was saying earlier about the step-side Fords, is like, I think that's a thing in, like, being a design guy, it bothers me. Like, I feel like there's so many short changes taken now in vehicle design because they're looking at maximizing profit, that they're forgetting that America was the style leader, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, yeah, a Ferrari's cool, but, a Charger is cooler. Like, there's a lot of vehicles that you can point to, a Cobra and, a Corvette, and, stylistically, they're, iconic cars. And I don't see a lot of that coming out of America. Although we're starting to see these, like, more bespoke, custom things that are happening, and I hope to see more of that, because I think there's a lot of consumers out there who look at these vehicles and they're like, man, I don't want this new thing. I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the functionality of it. I want to have a relationship with this, with this machine. And,
we're seeing that with electric cars. Like, there's being pushback now on this whole electric movement. Like, people are going, yeah, it's great, make that an offer, but don't force them on us. We don't want to go down that route.
Yeah, and I think it's different if you grew up, around, motors and engines and the smell and the tactility of it and everything. Like, you know, when I think about, you know, I have cars in my head, vehicles in my head of like, oh, okay, cool, a couple more bucks, I'm going to get this. I have a 1967 Jeep Willys. Thing tops out at 30. You know what I mean? I'm telling you, it is the funnest vehicle to drive around my neighborhood. Like, people almost crash into me, you know, waving at me, trying to get photos of me driving this old military Jeep around, right? And everybody's like, oh, you need to build it. You need to put a Hemi. And no, it's got the 4-cylinder straight 4 in it, and it does what I need it to do. I put surfboards on it and go down to the beach. It doesn't even have a key. But because, you know, we have a couple little switches in it that nobody can figure out, nobody would know how to start it or to shift it, you know? So I'm like, here it is, you know? Yeah, no, that's great. You know, in your era of racing, you know, was there a racer that you just looked up to and were like, man, you know, this guy is unbelievable?
Well, there were a lot of them that I looked up to, but the guy we chased the most, of course, was Walker, you know, and I've thought about it an awful lot, and if we could do it, I think if we all thought now, we'd do a little better against him. But here's the deal. He, if he was leading a race, nobody ever beat him. He didn't drive good from behind. He drove so hard and so fast that when he was behind, he made mistakes. And you know, he won. Oh, God, I don't even know how many races he won. But once he got in the lead, he was tough to beat. And his communications back in the day was better than ours.
Right.
He had more pits. They had better radios. And they had, you know, he just knew when he got out in the lead what he had to do, stay in the lead. And they kept him up to date all the time, whereas I didn't have that type help. You know, once in a while I'd say, well, he's 18 minutes ahead of you or whatever. You know what I mean? But, yeah, he was tough to beat, of course. And you know, I look back at it now, you know, would have done a lot of things a lot different, of course, but it's just not him. I mean, there were so many people that were good back in that day. I'm telling you, I could tell you stories all night long about some of the actual battles, you know what I mean?
Sure.
But he set the tone for the entire class. There's no doubt about that, you know, and we all, and then Ivan came along and Ivan started doing the same type thing, and he had a lot of help, and he graduated on. I mean, look where he went after he left Class 8. Yeah. You know, with Toyota and TRD and things of that nature. But those guys were all good, and all good in different ways, you know. There were times when I knew I could make time on those guys, and in particular sections of race courses, especially here in Parker. I remember one year, he started 800, and I started 818. He won the race that day. When I came off the California side,
just so people understand, you started 800 and what?
818.
Yeah,
that's 18 positions behind him in the race.
Right.
Okay, so I had 17 cars in front of me that I needed to pass. You know what I mean? But I remember coming off the California side, he had about a 14-minute lead, and I think I think Ivan was between us.
Right.
And after the first lap, I'd cut that thing down to about 8 minutes, and Ivan had dropped out of the race, so I was running ahead of everybody else. I'd got all 17 cars. Randy had those tie wraps. Here's was our tie wrap, and he just slid them down the bar when we passed him, and we knew there was only one tie wrap left in front of us.
Right.
And that was Walker. He ended up beating me, I think, by a minute. He beat me by a minute that day, and here in Parker, I just knew the course so dang well. I just reeled him in, and you know, there were times like that was just great. I think I lost 3 races in my career to him by a total of 2 minutes.
Oh,
yeah, but he was always just communications was a little bit better, and he always knew where he was at and where everybody else was at too.
Do you think was that communications? Was that from Phyllis, his wife, or?
Yep. Yeah. And they just had a little better radios and better antennas and things. They could talk a lot more around the course and get a little more information than we did. I've always believed that. Now, whether it's truth or not, that's just my theory.
Sure.
But they had an awesome setup. There was no doubt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What of that era too? Like, you know, Manny Iscario.
Oh, boy.
What made him so special to everybody?
His personality. I mean, he's very shy, very introverted. Now, Manny helped me a tremendous lot in my career. More stories forever. We met every day till the day he died for coffee at 7 a.m. in the morning for 20 years. And we had coffee together every morning, and he helped me a lot, as much as he possibly could, and he mentored me, he helped me. We talked strategy and amongst a lot of other things. But his personality, he was really an introvert, but once you got him to open up to you, you just loved the guy. He had, he's one of the nicest, but a fearless competitor. Let me tell you, him and Mears used to battle like you can't believe, and they hated each other. I mean, I think to this day, they never said a kind word about each other.
Right.
And it was just a battle. It was unbelievable between those two, and iconic races, and they were all televised at that time.
Yeah.
You remember when Mears broke the tire in Barstow going to the finish, and Manny passed him with about a half a mile to go in the finish, and there was just epic battles. But Manny in this community was just beloved. Manny came from basically nothing to go where he went, and he actually raced my dad's hydroplanes before people don't know this. He's a boat racer before he was an off-road racer. He raced my dad's hydroplanes. He was driving for my dad, and decided he wanted to build a mini truck, and he built a Courier in his backyard and won the very first race he ever raced. Wow. Against the guys who had been doing well with. And back in those days, Class 7 was a big deal.
Yeah.
Manufacturers were highly involved with the Courier and the Love and the Toyotas and Mitsubishis, and and he won the first race he's ever in, put him on the map.
Yeah.
And he built the thing in his backyard.
Yeah. It's cool. I mean, when you look at the relationship that we have in off-road between America and Baja in particular, I remember seeing this, Manny become successful, and all the Hispanic kids that I, grew up around were like, that's our guy, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember that being really cool. And then, back when I grew up going to Baja, it was like we didn't need an ID, Yeah, half the kids that would come over from Baja, they didn't have some sort of, passport to come here. It was like literally like, where are you going? Well, I'm going to go to school. Okay, yeah. Cool, right? They didn't even ask them if they're American or not, right? Just a different time. So, I thought it was really cool when somebody, that wasn't a thing that he put forward. It just was, mm-hmm. Right? But it definitely, when you look at the timeline now, too, and you see, the Vidolzas get the first Baja 1000 win for, a Mexican-born team, and then that get followed up with the Ampudias and, even Lopez, Abdullah Lopez. Like, now it's a thing. Now mm-hmm. It's like, hey, every race, better watch out for those guys because they're in contention for the overall, which I think is really cool.
Oh, I do too, without a doubt. And but I could tell Manny's stories forever. I'll tell you one little one.
All right.
And it has to do with another local here. One day we were asked to do a autograph signing thing down here at one of the bars, and so we go down there, and Manny has these beautiful things that Stone Ranger and all that, whatever it was. It beautiful. And I got some old pictures that were mimeographed off the copy machine, and we're sitting at a table, and he's got about 30 people wanting his autograph, and I got about 2. And a guy by the name of Toad, who lives here in Parker, comes up, and he said, "Danny, give me your autograph." And I says, "All right." And he looked at me, he says, "Sorry, buddy, but this is my guy." And Manny says, "Well, I'll give you one." And Toad still lives here and still remembers that.
Yeah. It was funny with Manny. I was real fortunate. Dad and Manny were very close, and I remember Manny as a kid, kind of, Manny was on everybody's pedestal, especially if you're a kid growing up, in Parker. I was still in college, and I was starting to come back because I'd started racing, and I was coming back pretty much every weekend to prep the cars, stuff like that, and I was right at tail end of my college career, so the partying days and stuff were kind of over. I was focused, and stuff like that. So I'd start coming home Thursday night, and then and then Sunday night I'd go back to Northern Arizona where I had classes, stuff like that. But I had all my classes scheduled Monday through Thursday, so I'd get 3 days off. So always come home Thursday night. Well, Manny and I, somehow it happened where I had ended up starting to go into Senior Manny's restaurant for lunch. So we ended up for about 2. And even actually after I moved back, about 3 years, pretty much up until he died, Fridays I would go into Senior Manny's until he got rid of the restaurant at 1 o'clock because his big lunch crowd was from 12 to 1. So 1 o'clock, I'd come in and every Friday, and Manny and I'd sit there for an hour. And I never got to order lunch. Manny would always bring me something he concocted in the kitchen. Jimmy, you got to try this. Jimmy, you got to try this. And Manny was one hell of a cook. And he had this flat-top grill that he towed, and he'd go camping and things, and that's just a whole other story. But, Manny'd always create some concoction I had to try. And he'd always want my opinion on it. And truthfully, 99% of the time was really good. But we'd sit there and talk on our lunch date, and I learned so much from him over the course of 3 or 4 years, just once a week having Manny to yourself for an hour. Because everybody left, and it was just him and me, and we'd sit in the bar, and we'd eat lunch. And some days we'd talk about racing for an entire day, and you just absorbed it all in. He'd start telling you stories and how to approach and his mindset on how to get around a guy and things like that. And other days, and Manny dictated the conversation. You never knew where his head's at. And other days, he'd bitch about some employee that quit, and then he'd want to talk about the Cardinals football team or something like that. So we talked sports, and, that was a day we didn't talk racing. You never knew quite what you'd get, 1 for lunch and 2 for the stories he'd tell. Sometimes it was racing, sometimes it was sports, sometimes it was just whatever, But I'm really fortunate for 3 or 4 years to, I had that just unfiltered access to him, and we really bonded. And it was, it's just amazing, just the guy's upbringing and where he came from, what he's accomplished. I mean, he was the face of Ford Motor Company. I mean, he was a guy they were running national ad campaigns with, this Mexican kid at the time from Parker, Arizona. I mean, it's remarkable, what he was able to accomplish, I mean, even in off-road world, I mean, the only other guy that I know had that big of an impact on an auto manufacturer is Ivan Stewart.
Right.
It really, I think Manny and Ivan, you start talking about the scale and the masses they reached. I mean, Manny and Ivan, those are the top 2 ever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty rad. I mean, like I said, I'm really looking forward to, putting in the work to bring back Parker to a level and then really surpass that, because I see the value here and, in the community, in the, in the land, even the relationship with the Indians, and in the river, like the whole package, right? I'm really excited about it. I'm really looking forward to, spending more time with both of you guys, I'd like to go to bed a little bit earlier than we did last night.
Well, I don't know. You, me, and your brother have had 3 a.m. times when we went to bed before, but generally it wasn't a project involved. It was more drinking. But.
Yeah, totally. I'm for that too, right? But no, I really appreciate the time, and I'm looking forward to spending more time with you guys and more here with people at Parker, and just to unlock the value of this, and tell people the story of Parker, tell people your story, Manny's story, and make sure that people it's not about forgetting, it's just so that they know how rich and valuable our culture is. It's really cool.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I thank you guys.
Always.
That was awesome.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
All right.